and advertisers want to promote those same products. That's why Google shows shopping ads, connecting users with thousands of advertisers. They say that they respectfully disagree with the conclusions announced today. They'll review the Commission's decision in detail and will consider an appeal. And we look forward to continuing to make our case, they say. So this one's going to rumble on by the looks of it.
Coletta Smith, thanks for that. It's getting on for 12:15. Nicola Sturgeon is expected to set out her position on a second independence referendum this afternoon. In Holyrood, the general election saw the SNP lose 21 of its Westminster seats. Five Live's James Shaw is across the story. I'd sort of lazily assumed, James, that having not had the greatest of general elections, then a second independence referendum would be not forgotten exactly, but just sort of not sort of talked about much for the foreseeable.
Perhaps they would have liked that, Adrian. Perhaps they would have been able to stop talking about it, to forget about it for the time being. But the fact is that before we even knew there was going to be a general election, Nicola Sturgeon came out in March and got a vote from the Scottish Parliament saying that there should be one. That was before we knew there was going to be a general election. So having set out that pitch, all those months ago, she now really has to say where she goes from here in the light of the general election. And she has been saying for some time that there is going to be news on what her view is in terms of what happens with whether there is Indie Ref 2, as the enthusiasts call it here in Scotland. But you have to think that given that result and the fact that parties like the Conservatives gained support on a platform where they said, vote for us if you don't want a referendum, you have to think that she's going to have to trim her sails to some extent on that issue. But the question is, how does she do it? How does she maintain the support of those hardcore SNP members who've always wanted independence, that they want nothing else, in fact, and other people who perhaps may have voted SNP but think, well, there are other more important issues like Brexit to deal with before we start looking, perhaps again at some point in the future, at a referendum.
Okay, but what are our options, do you think?
I think it is really difficult because she has to satisfy those two constitutions, the people who want it as soon as possible and those who might be in favour of it in the right circumstances. And she's got to come up with a formula which satisfies them both. So, she will still have to say that Scotland is entitled to a choice if it doesn't like the deal, perhaps, on Brexit that's coming down the track from the UK government. So some people suggest that it might be something like that. She would pitch it sort of as an insurance policy. If people in Scotland don't like the hard Brexit, if that's how you want to term it, if they don't like the look of it, then they should at some point be able to decide that they do want an independence referendum. But I think it is a really difficult one for her. It's quite a hard test. That's why politicians get paid their wages, because they have to fine-tune their policies in a way that hangs on to support. And for Nicola Sturgeon at this moment, who has lost some support, that is going to be a difficult thing to do.
And what about the DUP issue, the £1 billion that's going Northern Ireland's way?
Yeah, quite a lot of irritation in Scotland about that, Adrian, no doubt, because normally funding to the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is laid out under a particular formula called the Barnett formula, based on population share. And it's all, very carefully done. Everyone knows what they're getting. This is happening outside that. £1 billion going to Northern Ireland, which is going to have no frame of reference in the other parts of the UK. No other parts of the UK are going to see extra money. And what's interesting is that the Scottish Secretary, David Mundell, member of the UK government, had said that any deal with the DUP which subverted the Barnett formula would not get his support. So it'll be interesting to see what he says as a member of the government, given that this deal is outside the Barnett formula and very clearly favours one part of the UK and not all the other bits.
James Shaw, thanks for that. Sarah's here. What you got for us today, Sarah?
Hi there, Adrian. Yeah, Sadiq Khan this morning launched his knife crime initiative for London. You'll know that 24 young people have died just since January. That's an 11% increase on last year. So we'll be asking him what he's planning. An additional $625,000 for knife and gang crime projects is one of them. That's going to take total spending to $7 million. Also, things like helping communities to do more to protect the young people. and spread the message that carrying a knife is actually much more likely to ruin your life than to save it, and the ever-controversial stop and search, which he says is now going to be much more intelligence-led. Also things like metal detectors in all schools in areas that have the highest knife crime figures. So the Deputy Mayor will be with us, and we'll also be speaking to some former gang members to get their views on whether or not they think it'll work. And our big guest today is Robert O'Neill at the slightly earlier time of 1:30. He is the Navy SEAL who claims to be the man who shot Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. He's also one of the Navy SEALs that was involved in the operations that then went on to be immortalised in Captain Phillips and Lone Survivor. So he'll be with us at 1:30.
Thank you very much indeed. Just getting on to 12:20. Next story is all too familiar a tale to us on this programme and regular listeners to it. New figures uncovered by the British Medical Association suggest you could be facing a 13-hour round trip from your home to where you receive mental health treatment. We've covered this many times and it's always distressing to listen to. Take you back now to February of last year when we heard from Paul Hodge, who'd clocked up a total of 25,000 miles over 2 years visiting his daughter, who was suffering severe anxiety and PTSD.
Some of the episodes were violent and some needed medical treatment, and that's when we found out that there is no out-of-hours mental health support for youngsters in Cornwall at all.
So what difference would it have made to you if there'd been out-of-hours psychiatric care for a juvenile?
She might be with us today. Instead, she was taken away, put in an emergency placement with no mental health expertise in Somerset. Then she was moved on to Stevenage, again with no specialist mental health support. She stopped taking her meds, made herself ill, and had to be admitted to Colchester, which is about 350 miles away. And then she went from Colchester to Kent, which is 300 miles away. And now she's turned 18. Nothing to do with clinical need. They've suddenly moved her to Pontypridd. All of this is so unnecessary.
Paul Hodge talking to me in February last year. Dr. Andrew Molodinsky is an NHS consultant psychiatrist and mental health lead on the BMA Consultants Committee. I mean, that's an extreme tale, surely, we heard there, Andrew. But how much of this is there going on?
Well, it's certainly a horrible tale, isn't it? And you only have to listen to the emotion in that voice to realise how serious an issue this is. But I wouldn't say it was extreme. I mean, the research that we've done and the things we've uncovered reveal that those kind of trips and those kind of fairly random moves of hospital are far from rare in the modern NHS, sadly.
So what is the problem? Just a lack of appropriate facilities? You can't have one in every county that provides adequate provision, so people must travel.
Well, there is a small amount of that. So for people with very specialised mental health needs, and particularly people with learning disabilities or children, then sometimes they do have to move outside their area for legitimate clinical reasons. But the research that we've done, and which the NHS has looked at as well, very much focuses on just ordinary people like you and I who happen to become ill with common conditions like depression or schizophrenia. Our local doctors see us and judge that we need to be in hospital to be safe, but there's no bed locally because they're all full, so you get moved to an equivalent institution, but that could be anything up to 300, 400, 500 miles away.
And one doesn't have to be a psychiatrist, I thought, to work out the psychological impact on patients and their families.
Absolutely. I mean, it's devastating. Some of the cases that we've highlighted have ended up, sadly, with patients ending their lives. More commonly, it's that the individual's very distant from their family, who may only be able to visit every so often, or even not at all, at the time when the person is in crisis, confused, and needs their family and friends around them as much as possible and more than ever. It's a real tragedy.
Well, I suppose this is the last sort of branch of medicine where this should be happening. For example, if I needed some surgery, I don't know, on an appendix, whatever, then all right, it's inconvenient if I've told I've got to go and get it done in Aberdeen, but all right, I'll do it. But if the problem is your mental health, then it's more important for you than anyone, really, to have it done in your locale.
Absolutely, and the irony is that if this was happening in physical healthcare routinely, there would be an absolute outcry, and in fact it would just stop. The government would, rather than what we have in mental health, which is kind words and very little action, there would actually be something done by it, and that's what we're calling for today, is a similar kind of equivalent response from the Department of Health to actually do something about this.
And how do we get change?
Well, there are various things. There is obviously the question of money. Obviously, people like me always talk about money, but there is a real gap. So mental health conditions make up about 28% of NHS work, and we get about 13% of NHS funding. So your listeners will see that that's an enormous disparity, and that hasn't changed much over recent years. That's one thing. But also, we've had lots of changes in mental health around the way we do things, which aren't very evidence-based and which rely on sort of fairly haphazard commissioning arrangements. And what we need to do is to go back to the evidence and to look at what works well, what helps patients best, alongside the injection of finances, which is so clearly needed to allow us to do just what we want to do as doctors and nurses and social workers, which is to provide good quality, humane care for people near to where they live with these very common conditions. We're not talking about something that's weird and wonderful and needs a super specialist. This is stuff that you should be able to go to a clinic in your local town or a hospital in the nearest large town to have the care you need.
I mean, kind of related to what you're talking about, though it's not specifically what you've come on to speak on. What would you say as somebody who's top of the mental health care pyramid, in the sense that you're the consultant psychiatrist in the NHS? What would you say about the provision of counselling services in the NHS via GPs? It seems to me we talk a lot about the mental health stigma. It seems less of a problem than, you know, you want counselling through your GP. How do you get it? It seems to me a rich man's game. You know, you can get it if you pay for it, but on the NHS, I don't see many people getting it.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some big changes. So around the turn of the century, which is a long time ago now, there was the National Service Framework did set out some parameters, and there was a big investment. But it is true to say that in many parts of the country, there are very long waits for counselling and other forms of fairly basic psychological input of, you know, up to a year or more than a year. And for many people, that means it's essentially not available. I mean, imagine saying to someone who'd had a stroke that, yes, we've got the treatment that will work and will help you, and you can have it next year, or you can pay for it. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
And what about actually getting to see a psychiatrist? If you've got, again, through the NHS, you've got severe mental health issues, how long does it take to get in front of somebody like you?
Well, that's much more positive, certainly for adults. So my trust and most trusts, we have a 4-week maximum wait. So if someone in the town that I look after in Didcot is referred to see me, I'll see them within 4 weeks. And that's been the case for 10 years. So the irony is actually it's quite easy to see someone like me, but it's much more difficult.
It is in Didcot, not necessarily if you elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, things are very different in other branches of the service. So in children's services, there's been an enormous increase in demand, and there hasn't been the increase in investment, and also the increase in trained staff, because it takes a long time to train sort of senior doctors and stuff to catch up. So waits there can be a lot longer. And waits for specific kinds of therapy, like you say, can be very, very long. So we might see someone, identify the problem, but then they and we have a frustratingly long wait for them to get help.
But somebody's just texted, this will be so typical, I'm sure. Somebody called Glenn Showler says, "Hi Adrian, I'm on my way from Hull to Sheffield to see my autistic son who's in a mental health facility. Tragic." Now look, there are longer journeys then from Hull to Sheffield, but even that journey is just too far, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, you know, it's unforgivable. We're a rich country. You wouldn't think so hearing some of the news, but we're one of the richest countries in the world, and we can do much better than this, and we should do. It's a human rights issue as well as a clinical issue.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's Dr. Andrew Molodinsky, consultant psychiatrist in the NHS and on the BMA Consultants Committee. We've been looking at this issue all year, really, as part of our State of Mind season, looking at mental health in the country. There are details of organisations offering information and support, and they're available at bbc.co.uk/actionline. Right, Acid House. We thought it was time we covered this. It was part of our I Was There thing, which we do every week, looking at a defining moment in recent history through the eyes of those who lived through. We've covered disasters and mishaps and breakthroughs and discoveries and other such things, all which have been podcasted for you to listen at your leisure. Just go to the 5 Live website and click on podcast. This week we are going back to this. D-Mob, a guy called Gerald, Futures, Acid Tracks, Stacker Humanoid and 808 State. Some of the sounds of the summer of 1989 at the very height of acid house and the rave scene. It's a new kind of music found its way from Chicago to the UK, characterised by fast drum beats, deep bass lines and the use of synthesizers. Played in nightclubs in London and Manchester, underground warehouses, free parties, attracting thousands of young people, much to the displeasure of the Tory government at the time. The rave scene grew out of acid house, which in turn had grown out of the mainstream house music explosion. Both acid and those raves came to symbolise a moment that was new and fast-paced and which defied convention and authority. With me to reminisce are a guy called Gerald, aka Gerald Simpson, DJ, producer and musician, renowned for his 1988 hit Voodoo Ray, which you heard a clip of there. We got the Hacienda DJ turned writer and broadcaster Dave Haslam, and also Paul Staines, former PR officer for the Sunrise Collective, which organised raves and acid house parties. He's now a political blogger, publishes the influential Guido Fawkes site. So I see Dave Haslam before me. I'm going to have to ask you to start with some basics here. At the time, I was a student in London. It's not that I was against it. I was just bewildered. I just couldn't work out what was going on. So what was it? And why was it called acid house? I think that's what put me off, because I'd never taken drugs. I wasn't particularly judgmental about people who did. I didn't really know what I was doing. So it was like watching people do a load of ballroom dancing. It would have been fun to join in, but I didn't have the skills to do it. And in this case, I thought, I don't take drugs. I don't know how to dance like that. I don't know how to dance at all. So I was left out. But what is it?
Oh, you missed out, Adrian. Well, you were taking drugs. You were drinking alcohol, weren't
Okay,
you?
look,
So,
let's not get into that
no,
point.
but I'm
But
just
look,
saying,
I take it. No,
I mean,
no,
one of the changes in the culture was that people stopped drinking alcohol, and taking ecstasy. That was one of the changes.
Okay, so is that why it's called acid house? I had an argument with my, otherwise lovely editor today. I said, well, why was it called acid house? And he said, well, because it sounded acidy. Well, I don't know what he's talking about. He normally makes things simple for me, but he made them more complicated.
Yeah,
what does acid refer to?
The acid, for some people, has referred to the taking of drugs, but for other people has referred to the kind of the spacey sound that the house music producers were creating in Chicago and Detroit.
So spacey referred back to LSD.
Exactly,
20 years before.
exactly. So the change really was there was a music change in that era. In the 80s we'd had New Romantics and we'd had all that all that kind of scene. It was a new scene musically, sonically, a lot of instrumental music, as you say, synthesizers, bass lines. But there was also a lifestyle change. It was about the baggy jeans came in, the t-shirts. As I say, the use of ecstasy, and it was an underground scene, Adrian. That was probably one of the reasons why a lot of people missed out on it or were bewildered by it, because it had been bubbling under in 87, 88, and it went kind of overground in 89. But it was still a secret thing, I can remember I was DJing the Hacienda 2 nights a week, and at that point, the Hacienda was still relatively unknown. God, it's got a bit spacey.
Yes, it did get a bit spacey. Let's just speak to Paul Staines. Paul, you just briefly help me with the origins. What do you understand of them? The same as Dave?
I think so. For Dave was saying it became big in 1989, that's when I got involved. So I wasn't really there in the early days when the Hacienda was starting. I was more when it was going mainstream. And how I got into it was my friend Tony Colston-Hayter was one of the big rave organisers. And he was all over the front page of the tabloids as Mr. Big of Acid House. And the only person who could deal with the press was me. So he called me up and said, I've got a problem, can you help? And I was working in politics, so he thought I might be able to help.
So you were a press man for Acid House. I mean, that's well, you know, it's not underground anymore when it's got a press spokesman.
Yes, I was a spin doctor for Acid House in the weekend, and I was a political advisor in the weekdays.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, you know, some of the original people around on the scene kind of did resent the fact that it went overground in a kind of a tabloid way, because in a lot of ways, it obviously opened it up to a different audience, but it also opened it up to the authorities becoming aware of what was going on, and you know, and that was not necessarily what we wanted.
But I think we took it from an elite of a small. To be honest, in a way, the Hacienda was snobby in a way. You know, you had to be in the in crowd to a mass market with thousands of people at open air parties.
Gerald, what would you add to what we've said so far?
Well, I just remember the Hacienda being really in place and everything. Acid House, I mean, I was coming from a different angle. I mean, I was like, I think 18, 19 when I discovered it. And I was into jazz, funk and soul and all this kind of thing, and we was always looking for a new dance, basically. We were more into dance. We used to get high on dancing. And like basically acid to us was like a stripped down funk. It was like you would dip funk in and then acid would come out.
Okay, and it didn't require much technical dancing expertise to be in there, as far as I was still too scared to join in because I've got a horror of dancing, but there was a lot of just jigging around and waving your arms about.
No, but with dance music at first it did actually apply. I mean, you had to have like a feeling and then kind of you'd get into it. But I think with the drugs and everything, people kind of acquired like the feeling they kind of tapped into it that way, you know what I mean?
All right, listen, I'll come back to you after the news and sport. I'm sort of feel like I'm losing my Acid House virginity here somehow. 25 years after I should have had this conversation. I'm now having it. Let's get the news and sport.
On digital, online, smartphone and tablet, this is BBC 5 Live.
With the headlines, I'm Jo Critcher. Google's been fined more than £2.1 billion by the European Commission after it was found to have given its own advertising top priority in search results. The fine is the regulator's largest penalty for distorting the market. The Prime Minister is calling for a major national investigation into what went wrong with cladding fitted to high-rise buildings. It follows the Grenfell Tower disaster in which 79 people are known to have died. Cladding from 95 buildings in England has now failed fire safety tests. A gang who tortured and killed a vulnerable man on Tyneside have been jailed. Jimmy Prout was found dead near his home in North Shields after sustained abuse. 4 people have received sentences ranging from 9 to 33 years. The man accused of driving into a group of Muslims near Finsbury Park Mosque last week has appeared in court. Darren Osborne faces charges of murder and attempted murder after a man died and 9 others were injured. Sport now with Delith Lloyd.
Andy Murray has pulled out of today's exhibition match at the Hurlingham Club in London as he's been feeling some soreness in his hip. Our tennis correspondent is Russell Fuller. Russell, not ideal ahead of Wimbledon next week.
No, in an ideal world, Delith, he would have had more practice on the grass this week in match conditions, even though this was an exhibition at Hurlingham. He lost in the first round at Queen's last week, and although he's due to play on Friday afternoon at the Hurlingham Club, it means a maximum of 2 grass court matches heading into Wimbledon. No word yet on whether it's disrupted his practice too much. He's certainly been hitting at Wimbledon in the last few days. The word from his team is that they are being ultra cautious. Hopefully Murray does play at Hurlingham on Friday and then begins the defence of his Wimbledon title on centre court at 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon.
Russell, thank you. They're still off for rain at Eastbourne, where Novak Djokovic is in action. Johanna Konta is scheduled to play later. To Leicester, where England women are playing Pakistan at the World Cup. Henry Moran's watching this one.
21 overs gone. England's innings starting to move through the gears. 114 for 2 is the score, despite the loss of Sarah Taylor for 11 and Tammy Beaumont for 14. This partnership between Heather Knight, the skipper, and Matt Siver is now heading towards towards the 60 mark, and at 114 for 2, England will feel a lot more happy with life here in the cloudy conditions of Leicester.
Warren Gatland says he was reluctant to use a bench populated with controversial call-ups as the Lions drew 31-all with the Hurricanes in Wellington. The tiring starters let slip a 14-point lead with 4 of the replacements not getting on. Ian Henderson's yellow card in the second half saw the Lions concede those points after leading 23-7 at half-time.
You may have been a little bit more positive about bringing those players on fresh and that, but so much was made of that. You kind of went, okay, but I understand people's views and whatever, so you just, you've got to take cognizance of that, and we made a collective decision with the coaches that we would make them as injury replacements or as HIA replacements, which is happened in 2 of the occasions.
Scotland have named their squad for the Women's Euro 2017 next month. Manchester City midfielder Jen Beattie misses out because of an ankle injury, while Everton ladies defender Gabby George has become the club's first full-time professional female footballer. After success at the World Cup recently for the England under-20s, the under-21s played Germany in a Euro 2017 semi-final this afternoon. The Swansea centre-half Alfie Mawson, though, says the pressure will be on the Germans.
All the way from the young to the first team, I feel like the last couple of competitions has shown how good they are, and I feel like they've got to live up to that. So I think that pressure's on them. We're just going to go out there and play how we have been playing so far.
There'll be coverage on the BBC Sport website and app from 5 o'clock. And Leeds Rhinos have confirmed the signing of Catalan Dragons halfback Richie Myler from next season on a 3-year contract.
This is BBC 5 Live on digital, online, smartphone and tablet.
The roads are still looking very busy. In Renfrewshire on the M8 eastbound, an earlier broken down vehicle is causing slow traffic just outside Glasgow Airport at junction 28. In West Yorkshire on the M62 westbound, there are severe delays. Traffic's currently stop-start from just before junction 22 for Richworth Moor back to junction 24 to Ainley Top. That's because of a multi-vehicle accident. In Derbyshire on the M1 northbound, an earlier accident is causing slow traffic between junction 28 for Alfreton and junction 29 for Chesterfield back to junction 27 for Hucknall. A vehicle had collapsed with a Trent Central reservation. In Greater London on the M25 anti-clockwise, traffic's queuing because of a police incident between junction 25 for Enfield and junction 24 for Potters Bar. And in Essex on the M25 clockwise, an accident involving 3 cars and a lorry has closed one lane between junction 26 for Waltham Abbey and junction 27 for the M11. That's causing queues back to on the M25 to the Homestay Tunnel. Jo Critcher, 5 Live Travel.
More live sport, pure live sport. Join 5 Live Sports Extra for live coverage of the ICC Women's World Cup.
Everyone's really looking forward to this World Cup. It's going to be a great competition.
The under-dotted, the Yorker Boulder, full, straight, middle stump rock back.
For full listings, visit bbc.co.uk/5live.
We want to show the world how good we are.
Hunter bowls, and this is lobbed towards mid-wicket, diving catch one-handed, and what a way to finish.
An unforgettable summer of cricket, the ICC Women's World Cup on 5 Live and 5 Live Sports Extra. This is BBC 5 Live, available on the BBC iPlayer radio app. 5 Live Daily with Adrian Childs.
That, as everybody knows, is French Kiss by Lil Louis, which hit number 2 in the charts at the height of that summer. We're looking back at the birth of Acid House, or when it was sort of really big in the 1989. We've got a DJ, Gerald Simpson, another DJ turned writer and broadcaster, Dave Haslam, and Paul Staines, who a press man for Acid House with the Sunrise Collective, and now publishes the influential political site Guido Fawkes. I've got a text has come in from Andy, who isn't a fan of this genre of music, and you might all have something to say on this, but Paul, deal with this as the press spokesman. Andy says, brain rot, non-music for people too chemically damaged to realise to realise they've been listening to a car alarm for 5 hours. The birth of this degenerate waste of your eardrums marks the exact moment I stopped bothering to go to nightclubs. The only upside was that football hooliganism went into severe decline because they were all taking ecstasy and too stoned to fight. But what would you say to that? What is Andy missing?
I certainly agree with the latter point that football hooliganism went downhill and it became socially unacceptable to be a hooligan. On the first point, I think if you didn't do the drugs, it was nowhere near as good. And my wife, for instance, hates it, and she always complains if I play anything like that.
Excuse me, I don't know what that was about. It's all getting very spacey, as Dave said.
I think if you when it went to the High Court, I remember it being defined by a judge as repetitive beats, and it was. And if you weren't there and you weren't doing drugs, I don't think the effect, the euphoria that went across the dance floor was quite the same.
Right. So to be clear, and ecstasy is illegal. I don't want to be too sort of tight-bottomed about this, but it was and is. But we are talking about a genre of music that you're saying you had to be taking drugs to appreciate. I mean that.
I don't think everyone was, but I think the vast majority were. And the DJs, when they dropped a tune, you'd see this wave of euphoria literally go across the dance floor. I mean, Gerald...
But it was the ecstasy they were dropping, not the tunes.
Yeah, but they'd taken that an hour or two beforehand, and it was going through their system, and the music would be accentuating and amplifying the kind of euphoria, feelings of euphoria. When I hear Gerald's Voodoo Ray come on, I mean, my dopamine and serotonin receptors are just completely energised, and I remember that rush I used to get of joy when a tune I liked came on.
Dave, do you need drugs to enjoy?
I really like that. I like that quote because what it reminds me of is the fact that when rock and roll came along, a whole load of people didn't like that and thought that was brain rot. That happens all the time. And that was a sign of the fact that there was a revolution going on. I didn't mind that people were taking sides. I didn't mind that some people didn't like the music and didn't like the scene and didn't feel like they fitted in. Because in a way that was kind of part of our power. People like to be part of something secret, And I think there was a big change in nightlife triggered by acid house. And if you think of the discotheques that had been prevailing through the 70s and the 80s, where people were drinking lager, that girls were dancing around their handbags, men were kind of circling them in a predatory way, like kind of lions in the Serengeti. The DJ was on the microphone all the time, just playing, the hits and talking about who's part of the Ford Escort across the entrance.
Okay.
All that went.
So it was more edgy, yet more civilised at the same time, in a way.
Well, there was certainly a lot less violence, I mean, and there was also a lot of progressive stuff came out of it, because if you remember in the late 1980s, we had Thatcher talking about no such thing as society. We were kind of 10 years into the Tory regime where it was all about the individual, and suddenly thousands of people around the nation were enjoying a collective experience, and that was a very progressive thing, and I think that's one of the great legacies of acid house.
So, Gerald, briefly, how was the atmosphere in nightclubs for you? How would you describe it?
Well, it was changed. It was changing because.
Oh, we seem to have lost Gerald. We'll try and get him back.
Well, one of the things about clubs was, of course, they were closing at 2 o'clock. Certainly out in Manchester, maybe 3 o'clock in London, so people had nowhere to go. So one of the things that fueled the warehouse parties and the raves were the fact that people wanted to stay up all night long dancing. And again, that change, which was a real big generational change, that forced through all the changing in licensing that happened all through the 1990s, where that demarcation between sitting in a pub till 11, then piling out into a club till 2, dancing around your handbag, going home, all that experience went. So there was a blueprint really now for what we do now was all born in the late 80s.
I mean, there was this backlash. Acid house was the soundtrack to this growing youth protest movement. He said we had 1989 pro-democracy movements had broken out around the world. The Berlin Wall came down, and we had Thatcher celebrating her 10th year in power, having crushed the miners. She was clamping down on mass gatherings, apparently. But acid house seemed to represent that clash between impatient youth and mystified Middle England.
Some newspapers have called acid house music a sinister and evil cult which lures young people into drug taking. The message is certainly getting across.
What do you know about acid house music?
There's meant to be a drugs-related craze. Seems to be the most worrying thing.
And where did you find that out?
That was in the paper.
Do you think it's anything to do with a certain religion, do you think?
No,
is it anything like that?
No, it's more to do with a kind of a drug, isn't it? It's a drug.
Yeah, well, those that take it ought to be ashamed of themselves. Because presume they do frenzied dancing, that kind of thing. Probably out of control, not behaving like normally they would, because they're under the effects of the drug.
I've just read about it in the newspapers that acid house music, I assumed it was something to do with the drug scene.
It must affect the brain in some way.
Unless it's just the music that does it.
All them lights flashing don't do you any good either, do it? I wouldn't even go in the pub where them lights are. They drive you mad, don't they?
Well, I think we can agree that was quite brilliant. So, Paul, I mean, the branding was wrong. If it had been called something else, it might have been an easier sell. Well, perhaps that was the point.
I can remember, well, the key branding in the beginning was the big yellow smiley face, which was a throwback to the 60s. In fact, I can remember Piers Morgan, the Bazaar column in The Sun, appearing in a big smiley face T-shirt, and then only a few weeks later, on the front page of The Sun, was this acid house outrage. So the tabloids originally tried to jump on what they could see was a craze that was happening, and then they turned against it when they realised that it wasn't quite as wholesome as they hoped, and it was a pivot that you could see happening elsewhere. I mean, the nightclubs and the traditional breweries were getting very angsty, and they were big donors to Conservatives, and they were pushing the issue because they were losing out on the clientele.
And people died taking ecstasy. A 16-year-old Claire Leighton died after taking an ecstasy tablet.
More people. I don't want to go back into my old lines that I did when I was.
I know what you're going to say. That more people die.
Far more people die from alcohol. Yeah, and you know, every weekend people die from alcohol. So I think it's a fact, and when the Drugs Advisory Committee said that ecstasy was safer than peanuts, you know,
I think that was the advisory committee, was it? I think David Knott, wasn't it? The drug czar at the time. Well, he was part of it, but yes.
Okay. But when that came out, and I think it's a scientific fact, people just didn't want to accept it. I mean, I think that smoking marijuana is safer than drinking spirits. So I don't accept that it was a high-risk activity, and some people are always going to be addicts and have unfortunate outcomes, but those people will find their downfall via alcohol, drugs, or whatever.
I think one of the high risk thing about ecstasy is the fact that there isn't really such a thing as pure MDMA, and the authorities have never had the bottle to provide clubs and other premises with testing facilities. So often kids are taking adulterated pills which may or may not contain MDMA, and so it does turn into a little bit of a lottery.
So then we get into the legalisation. We get into the legalisation debate. Then, I mean, I just wonder if the government or the authorities had sorted it out and were testing drugs. Then I don't know. It would have gone to something else, because the point of it was kind of naughty. You know, it was counter-establishment. It was anti-establishment. So it had to be on the run, which is why we then had these raves. It came out of clubs, and which was something else I didn't really understand and never dared go to. I mean, what was that all about then, Paul?
Well, you had to understand that something called a mobile phone was a new device, and the whole idea of these raves was they were, say the London ones were around the M25 in a field somewhere. They'd been set up secretly the night before or the morning before, and the trick was to get enough people, a critical mass of people, a few thousand people, in a convoy going around the M25 to the location so the police couldn't stop it. And once there was a few thousand people there, the party was on and the police would just stand by. So what would happen, we would, as the organisers, we would put out, sell the tickets and put out on the pirate radio stations that we're going to have a party, and then we would reveal the location via people calling up an 0898 number at the last moment from their new mobile phone, and then heading off into the night, and you'd see thousands of cars driving around looking for laser lights in a field somewhere.
And how big did these go? There was one that the Sun dubbed Ecstasy Airport.
Exercise. I mean, the people who set that up are the same kind of people who would set up a U2 concert rig. So it was quite a big...
I think that was one of yours, wasn't it?
Yeah. I'd say that would be about 10,000 a number. And, you know, that was...
outside of the mainstream, you know. I mean, there were you know, if you'd gone back to Glastonbury in 1989, you know, there wasn't any acid house around then. And although those numbers are quite big, you know, that it was something that was quite hard to get to. You know, as Paul says, you had to kind of know who to phone, when to phone, and you know, that was definitely part of the appeal. I mean, I think that, I think the other thing was that, you know, you talk about the drugs, but actually what people were addicted to was the experience. People would go to such lengths to have that communal, collective experience, to listen to music that was really only being played at the raves. It wasn't getting played on Radio 1. MTV weren't playing any videos, if there were any videos. There were a few records that were breaking through, you know, like Voodoo Ray and like D-Mob, etc. But most of the records, which are now seen as acid house classics, they were very marginal and underplayed. So people were going to these things for the intensity, and that's really what people were addicted to, whether it was going to a club or whether it was going to warehouse raves.
So can I ask you, Paul, I don't know whether you grew up to have kids yourself, but would you had teenage kids? Would
no,
you
they're
be
10 and 12,
okay.
and they're in Ireland and won't be able to hear this.
Okay, right. So would you be relaxed about them going to something equivalent to your Ecstasy Airport?
There are no libertarian fathers of teenage girls, so no, I wouldn't be relaxed. But that would be something that would probably inspire them to do exactly that.
Well, hang on, Dave disagrees. You'd be more than happy.
Yeah, I totally disagree. I mean, I'm lucky enough that, you know, me and my family, we live in Manchester, and there's still, you know, there is still a great house music, acid house scene. There's great DJs, there's great venues, there's great licensed venues, there's all-night venues, there's warehouse parties, there's all kinds of stuff happening. And, you know, my kids, who are they're 28 and 20 now, when they, you know, stagger in at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, I am filled with nothing but envy for them, you know, and I know that they're having, you know, a wonderful experience, and I completely and utterly trust them. And the idea that, you know, a high street discotheque, you know, with the kind of doorman that you might get there, the kind of, you know, predatory guys that you might get there, are in some ways safer for a young woman or a young man, you know, than a rave, which is about passion, and it's about community, and it's about feeling connections with people, and it's about just about the excitement that you should feel when you're a young person. You know, why are we controlling them? Why do we try and control our young people? It's because the authorities are scared. You know, they're into mind control. They don't want people out there doing their own thing.
There's one singer indelibly associated with the rave scene, responsible for this massive hit, which became indelibly associated with raves over the next few years.
Everybody's free to feel good. Everybody's free to feel good. Everybody's free.
That's Rosala, who is hailed as the Queen of Rave and joins us now. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Okay, good, thanks. Now, were you actually at those raves, or by then were you sitting in your £20 million home in Berkshire on the proceeds of the song?
First and foremost, I wish I had a 20 million Berkshire home. But no, I was actually performing at these raves. I was in the hospital, and I remember a lot of these massive raves where they had anywhere between 15 to 10,000 people were sort of put up on farmland. It was fantastic.
I mean, I'm kind of feeling envious, sort of, I wasn't there. I mean, is the atmosphere like anything you've come across since?
Oh, no. I've done a few, you know, in brackets, rave scenes that they've tried to recreate this few years, which sort of took me back to those days, but it can never be the same. You can't replicate something that once was so massive in the early 90s, where you had anywhere, like I said, between 10 to 50,000 people, and there's never been anything like it in modern times.
I mean, that was a hit in 91, but you've been singing as raves before them, so how did that work? Somebody had set up a sound system, put some kind of track on, and you'd get going? Rosella might have had enough. We'll try and get her back up again. What's the legacy, do you think, of in terms of music? Where can you hear it now then, Dave?
Well, first of all, the dance music scene is now global, you know, and it started small, it got bigger, it went mainstream in 1989. But actually, there are now kids in South America, and there's kids in the Philippines and kids in America who are discovering rave music, discovering electronic dance music for the first time, you know, and it's nearly 20 years later. And a lot of the music that we hear on, for example, on adverts, you know, or on TV or on soundtracks, a lot of that came from that computer-generated music. Okay. And I do think that the whole lifestyle of going out on a Saturday night, you know, it changed in that period. And if we hadn't had acid house, you know, we would still be kind of living in that 1970s world of discotheques, you know, with potted palm trees and, you know, and girls having to wear stilettos.
I mean, but that music, Paul, it does sound, not so much the track we just heard, but some of the acid house classics, they do sound a bit dated. It sounds a bit plonk, like a Sega or Nintendo soundtrack.
I think you're right, and I think the technology's moved on, and I think things are more symphonic now, and the production standards are probably higher. Don't forget, Gerald, who is a dance floor legend, and I really wanted to tell him that, made that track in his bedroom. Nowadays, they have a lot more money, and when someone like Moby does something, he's got a whole team of engineers. So
well, he has, but you can make better stuff in your bedroom now, can't you? Because the big technology is available to everyone.
But you know, they didn't have that much technology, and the quality of the technology is massively increased.
Rosala, we got back. What do you think the musical legacy was of that music, of the rave music at the time?
The musical legacy? Well, I mean, today, you know, when I listen to the radio, I hear quite a few dance tracks where they sound so similar to the rave scene. I mean, I think there's some really great dance tracks out there, but they take it back to the early 90s. And so I'd like to think that they've copied us. I think that's where the legacy is.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed for your time. Rosala, thanks to you, Dave, and to you, Paul. Great talking about you. Loads of texts from you, ranging from Carlin East Sussex, acid was absolute pants, to these were the absolute greatest times of my life, best times ever. So, I don't know, you take your choices. Thanks for sharing your memories, folks. Thanks for your company this morning. Afternoon edition is next.
Thank you, Adrian. After 1, 24 young people have been stabbed to death in London since the start of the year. We'll hear what the mayor is planning to do about it and speak to a former gang member.
Plus, the former Navy SEAL who says he killed Osama bin Laden. Cue text saying, no, bin Laden's still alive. He runs a deli near me in Stoke.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live.
It's 1 o'clock on 5 Live. This is Afternoon Edition with Nahal Arthur-Naika and Sarah Brett. In our main news, Google gets a record fine for distorting the market.
In sport, Andy Murray suffers a setback to his Wimbledon preparations.
And if you missed our big summer TV preview yesterday and plan on doing nothing else all summer long, you can hear it right now by downloading the Afternoon Edition Extra podcast.
This is BBC 5 Live.
News at 1 o'clock. Google has been handed a record fine of £2.1 billion by the European Commission. It found the company had abused its power by putting its own shopping comparison service at the top of search results. Here's our technology correspondent, Rory Kethland-Jones.
It kind of lays down a marker, really, for how determined the European Union is to take on these big American technology giants. We've seen a pattern of this over the last 10 years, increasing concern. The term in Brussels now is GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, for American technology giants with huge power, and increasing concern that they're abusing that power.
Theresa May says there should be a major national investigation into what went wrong with cladding on high-rise buildings. 95 tower blocks in 32 areas in England have now failed fire safety tests following the Grenfell Tower disaster. A gang who tortured and killed a vulnerable man on Tyneside have been jailed. Jimmy Prout was found dead near his home in North Shields after sustained abuse. Zahid Zaman will spend at least 33 years in jail for his murder. Anne Corbett received a minimum of 27 years. 2 others were sentenced for causing or allowing his death. The Defence Secretary has told 5 Live the deal between the Conservatives and the DUP will mean his party can't be ambushed in the Commons. So Michael Fallon also says it will make Brexit negotiations easier.
We need to be sure when
we produce a budget, when we're doing the Brexit negotiations on these big things, that we have a majority, that we can carry our way in the House of Commons. And that's very important, particularly for the Brexit negotiations. We can't be in the position where suddenly we could be ambushed. That gives us more certainty, it gives us more stability.
The man accused of carrying out the Finsbury Park terror attack has appeared at the Old Bailey. Darren Osborne, who's 47 and from Cardiff, is charged with murder and attempted murder. One man died and 9 others were taken to hospital after a van was driven into a crowd near a mosque in North London last week. The Governor of the Bank of England is warning about rising consumer debt. Mark Carney says lenders should put aside more than £11 billion over the next 18 months to protect against economic risks.
Consumer credit growth has far outpaced that of household income over the past year, with notable increases across credit cards, personal loans, and auto finance. In an environment of intense competition, interest margins have fallen and risk assessments by lenders have declined. Lenders are therefore more vulnerable to losses and stress.
Nicola Sturgeon is expected to set out her position on Brexit and a second independence referendum later. The Scottish First Minister will make a statement at Holyrood. Our correspondent Andrew Black has more.
There was an acknowledgement following the Westminster election that perhaps the SNP lost vote because of uncertainty over the independence issue. So we do expect Nicola Sturgeon to set her position on that this afternoon. Whether or not she's going to imminently call a second independence referendum or whether she's going to stick to her previous timescale, we simply don't know.
And the sport with Delith Lloyd back in the fold, our long-lost Delith.
Yes, always miss you both, but good to be with you back in the studio. Andy Murray's Wimbledon preparations have suffered a setback after the world #1 pulled out of this afternoon's exhibition at the Hurlingham Club in London. Murray has a sore hip, but is still expected to play there on Friday. He begins the defence of his Wimbledon title 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon on centre court. England's women are batting against Pakistan at the World Cup. Henry Moran is watching in Leicester.
A partnership of 131 has helped England to 173 for 2 after 28 overs. Nat Siver 82 from just 55 deliveries alongside the captain Heather Knight 57 from 72. This is the sort of England performance we were expecting, and hopefully from an England point of view this partnership can continue to build towards the back end of the innings. 173 for 2 is the score after 28 overs.
Sounds positive, Henry. You can hear commentary on 5 Live Sports Extra. And the Lions head coach Warren Gatlin says Ian Henderson and Courtney Laws have played themselves into test contention after today's 31-all draw against the Hurricanes in Wellington. Laws came off after 50 minutes, an indication he could feature in the second test on Saturday.
This is BBC 5 Live on digital, online, smartphone and tablet.
Thank you, Delith. Look at the weather remaining pretty wet for most of us this afternoon, with rain continuing. Some of the rain will be heavy and thundery in the southeast of England, and while there'll also be the risk of some thunderstorms in Northern Ireland, it will be a little bit brighter there. Feeling pretty cool with highs of around 16 to 19 degrees. Wednesday, more rain across England and Wales and some showers to Northern Ireland, but dry and brighter in Scotland. On the roads, on the westbound M62 in West Yorkshire, 2 lanes are closed because of an earlier accident just before junction 22 at Richworth Moor. There's congestion as far back as junction 24, that's Enley Top. It's taking about an hour and 45 minutes to get through that at the moment. On the clockwise M25 in Essex, an accident means 1 lane is closed between junction 26 at Waltham Abbey and 27 at the M11. Queues as far back as the Homesdale Tunnel near junction 25. And finally, on the anti-clockwise M25, there is a rolling roadblock in place between junction 25 at Enfield and junction 24 at Potters Bar. It's causing congestion as far back as junction 26 at Waltham Abbey.
BBC Music at Glastonbury. Come rain or shine, we've brought you incredible performances from awe-inspiring headliners.
Things happen on that pyramid stage. There's a power there.
Glastonbury, I have to admit, I'm very nervous.
To the tiny acts that have gone on to make it big.
You gonna sing this with me, Glastonbury? Last weekend, we were back at Worthy Farm.
As the world's biggest festival returns.
BBC Music at Glastonbury. This year, experience it as if you were there.
Watch highlights from the likes of Radiohead, Ed Sheeran, Emily Sandé, Barry Gibb, and so many more.
Thank you, Glastonbury! Available to watch now on BBC iPlayer.
Good afternoon. 6 minutes past 1. Sarah sits to my right. I am, of course, sitting here. And we, for the next 2 hours and 53 minutes, will be talking to you about many things. I'm going to be interviewing one of the most publicly visible trans women, Rhiannon Stiles, in the 3rd hour of the show. And we're going to be talking about LGBT bullying, something that Rhiannon talks about in the interview. We're also going to be talking, or not talking, but listening, hopefully, to Nicola Sturgeon live as she's set to make an announcement, which we think is going to be about Independence Referendum 2, which is a sequel, and we all know what sequels are usually like. So we're going to find out more about that after 2 o'clock. And we're also, very importantly, going to be talking to the man who claims to have shot and killed Osama bin Laden. Now, the reason I made a somewhat flippant joke just before we started this show about people and their conspiracy theories about bin Laden is because I mistakenly mentioned to the taxi driver I had this morning that I was interviewing the man who killed bin Laden, at which, of course, the taxi driver said to me, "He's not dead, bruv." At which point I said, "Oh, why is he not dead? It's your own fault. Why is he not dead?" I know, I mean, I just heaped this upon myself. And then he went into this conspiracy theory, and then, of course, there is a YouTube video that everyone always has whenever they have a conspiracy theory. They have a YouTube video which proves, of course, beyond any reasonable doubt that what they're saying is true. Look, this man describes in this book, his name's Robert O'Neill, all the run-up to it, what he did, and of course the first thing that the cab driver said to me is, "How comes I haven't seen a picture of him then? Where's his body then?" It's like, oh, okay.
Well, he'll certainly... this will be food for thought from this interview, but it's not without its controversy for lots of reasons. But one of them is that there have been other Navy SEALs that have since disputed Robert's version of events. Key among them that he was the first person through the door and actually fired those shots. Other people have come forward since and said, no, it wasn't that, it was me. But there's no doubt that this man has had an extraordinary career as a Navy SEAL. If you've seen Lone Survivor, if you've seen Captain Phillips, that was his Navy SEAL particular team that were operational on both of those events that then went on to become immortalised in film. So Robert is with us after 1:30.
And Martin on Twitter has just tweeted me, said, "I thought I'd seen him strolling around Dunstable." Martin, I can assure you that whoever you've seen in Dunstable is not Osama bin Laden. No disrespect to Dunstable, but if he was trying to get away from the collective world security services, Dunstable's probably not a place he would go.
I know, last place I'd look.
There's a lot of CCTV all over this country. Someone would spot him. Someone would spot him. OK, it is now coming up to 10 minutes past 1. Theresa May says there needs to be a major national investigation into the use of cladding. 95 buildings, let's check that number out, 95 buildings in 32 local authorities have now been inspected, and all of them have failed the safety test. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent is Danny Shaw, and he joins us now. Good afternoon, Danny.
Hi, Michal.
More figures coming through all the time, Danny, and each time it appears to be 100% failure rate for safety tests. So what has the Prime Minister said this morning about that?
Well, what she has said is to update the Cabinet about these checks that are being carried out on samples of cladding that have been used in high-rise tower blocks, similar to the cladding that was used on Grenfell Tower. That's an aluminium composite type of material. And some quite stringent fire safety checks have been conducted. 95 samples from 32 local authority areas, 95 buildings from 32 local authority areas, and all of those samples have failed the fire safety tests. We know we've had some recent information that Newham in East London, Sefton in Merseyside are the two latest areas to be identified as having at-risk towers. A housing group in Manchester, One Manchester, said the number of its towers with cladding which had failed the tests had soared by 11. Total of 16 high-rise buildings owned by One Manchester have now been found to be encased with this combustible material. That just gives you a sense of the scale of these tests and how quickly the figures are changing. I mean, they're moving from, you know, last night it was less than that. Now it's going up all the time as more tests are carried out.
Danny, can you give some clarification on this? Firstly, the kind of testing that is being done now, was it more rigorous, or is it more rigorous than the testing that was done previously? Because, of course, the argument immediately after Grenfell by the people who did the cladding was that these tests were done and they were passed?
I think it's still unclear exactly what the regulations were, what tests were conducted, and how the material fits into the wider design of the building. You know, a material can fail a safety check, but that doesn't mean that the whole building itself is unsafe, because if precautions are then built into that, then clearly it may well be that it's fine to use that particular type of material. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing that a lot of these buildings are not being instantly evacuated, but when looked at in the round with other measures that are being taken, you know, there's no need to actually bring everyone out of the building. You know, in many cases, the cladding is being removed, but that's certainly not what's happening in every single building.
Is this a case of Theresa May, Danny, indicating that she supports a very big public inquiry that goes beyond looking purely at the causes of that particular fire? The fact now that every council block, it seems, is being tested.
Well, she obviously wants the public inquiry not just to look into what happened at Grenfell Tower and the response to that, and possible failings going back many years with the refurbishment work that was going on there. But she also wants potentially the second phase of the public inquiry to look at construction issues relating to high-rise buildings right across the country, and to look at cladding possibly going back decades and decades, because it seems that this is not just, you know, one individual isolated event, but it looks as though there has been some sort of wholesale failure either to conform to building regulations, or the regulations themselves haven't been up to scratch, and I think that's what she now wants to look at.
I heard Sajid Javid say over the weekend that you can't put a price on someone's life. I'm paraphrasing, that every life is priceless. But this sounds like it's going to cost a lot of money. Do we have an indication where this money is going to come from? And how much, of course, this national investigation is going to cost? Because that's going to be, of course, very lengthy, isn't it?
Well, I think the government's already indicated that it's providing support to the residents in North Kensington who've been affected by the Grenfell Tower fire. I would expect that the government will also pay the costs of the public inquiry and meet the legal fees for those concerned. That's fairly a normal procedure. But in terms of who's going to pay the councils to fit the new materials, to take down potentially dangerous materials, to rehouse people who have to be evacuated, I mean, those are discussions that I'm sure are being had behind closed doors between council officials and government officials. And potentially, you know, if firms are found to be at fault because they supplied materials and said that they were okay, and subsequently they were found not to be, then they could also be liable for some of the costs. I think these are decisions for further down the track, and I would have thought that the government will have to pay for some of it, but I'm sure they will equally be trying to get the councils to also stump up some money, and potentially private businesses as well.
Danny, as always, thank you. That's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
Well, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has said he understands why there are claims of a cover-up over the number of people who died in the Grenfell Tower fire. The official figure is 79 who are known to have lost their lives or are missing, presumed dead. The Labour MP David Lammy has said that he has sympathy with the allegation that there's a cover-up. The Mayor says the police are working hard to identify the victims, but the problem arises because there are a lot of grieving people who have no confidence in officials.
And I recognise that the police are working incredibly hard. I recognise that forensics on the ground is a really difficult task. I welcome the fact that the team around New York in 9/11 are now helping the police service do this incredibly difficult task. But, you know, I can't run away from the fact that when I speak to residents in North Ken, they relay to me the lack of confidence they've got in officialdom.
It's 1:15. It's Afternoon Edition with Nahal and Sarah. We're going to stay with Sadiq Khan because of an initiative that he has launched this morning in London. It's about knife crime. 24 young people under the age of 25 have been fatally stabbed on the capital streets just so far this year. Last year alone, knife crime increased 11%. So Sadiq Khan has today launched this renewed initiative to tackle knife crime, and it involves offering schools metal-detecting knife wands, a specialist team of police officers, including so-called super recognisers, and involving communities in intelligence-led stop and search. Sefton Henry is a former gang member who now works with the organisation Gangs Line to help young people and community staff to tackle gang culture. He started by telling me just how big an issue knife crime is in London.
I would say that it's a really massive issue. Throughout the history of gangs, knives have been around. We're talking over 100 years ago, we had the gang called Peaky Blinders, and they carried razor blades in their hats. Gangs and knives have always been around, even since the Roman times. They carry swords. Samurai, Chinese people carry samurai swords. African tribes carry spears. So this problem is not a new problem. It's always been around.
Why do young people in the communities that you work in carry knives?
Well, there's a few factors, and one of the factors is that they're scared. When somebody is frightened, they get something to defend themselves, and a knife is easily threatening to a person when they come to them. More time on the streets, you have gang members that are very threatening and young men that don't feel safe. And when they don't feel safe, that's when they say to themselves, okay, I'm going to carry a knife to try and feel safe.
So how do you get the message through to them that actually carrying a knife is more likely to end with you getting hurt than protecting yourself?
The thing is, you can't really say that to them, because as much as I would say to them, oh, carrying a knife is going to get you hurt, but when he turns around and says to me, well, are you going to be there? And I can't give him that I'm going to be there. Communities, but I was also in the mayor's office when they put out this schemes, and I spoke there and I said to them, you need to empower the right people to do the job. And they said that they was going to empower communities, but who in the communities are you empowering? Are you empowering someone like myself that's been jailed 7 times, that's been shot at, that's been stabbed, that's been bricked? Are you going to empower someone like me?
And
because
are they?
And that's the question that I'm asking, because they said that they're going to mobilise communities, but who in the communities are they talking about?
What about stop and search, Sefton? It's obviously hugely controversial. They say that now this new money is going to be partly at least focused into intelligence-led stop and search. What do you make of that term?
I think Well, I think stop and search is a good thing to an extent. But even more so than that, I would say they would need on-the-beat police officers that, instead of being a responsive team, they could be on the beat with the people on the streets, building a relationship, because relationship is actually what actually changes a person. Before, the police service was about coming in and stopping crime from happening in the first place. Now it's about when crime happens, then trying to deal with it, and that's the wrong approach. We're supposed to be stopping it. So to stop it, they would need to build relationships with the people that are around. There's a thing called divide and conquer, and the problem is, in Britain, I would say, we're so far apart from each other that it's bringing a barrier and a fear, and it's like that's them and this is us. But it shouldn't be like that. These are children. Some of them are like 13, 12. Why are we so far removed from them?
There's been quite a lot of talk in this press release about cuts to youth services, 22 million cuts in youth funding as a result of government cuts to councils. And I think that the mayor is suggesting that that has got something to do with the rise, you know, closing down of youth centres, etc. But in your experience, do the young people that we would be trying to reach to stop carrying knives use those services anyway?
I think they really do. Youth clubs are the most connected to young people than I think any other services really, or the mentors actually. Mentors are very close to young people as well. But I believe that they do use them, but when the youth clubs are up and running, what sort of schemes, what sort of focuses, and what sort of resources do they have to actually make a bigger impact? Because their pay is very low compared to somebody in a higher place. Their resources, a lot of the time, are being taken away from them. And I've heard many stories of youth centres having to shut down and so on because they wasn't getting enough funding and so on. So it's even when they are up and running, do they have enough resources and power to do the work that they do?
How big a problem is reoffending, Sefton, do you think? I see one of the plans here is to have a community sentence requirement added onto any jail time, meaning I guess that's a bid to stop reoffending, get people rehabilitated doing work within their communities. How big a problem is reoffending?
Reoffending is such a massive problem. We've got a revolving door in prison. People come into prison, they come out of prison, and they go straight back into prison. I am a perfect example myself. I've been to prison 7 times. It's a thing where the rehabilitation bit needs to be addressed a lot more. The mental health that causes the causes of being in a cell, being locked in a cell, and being around a lot of people that are criminals. It's a place where we want to punish people or we want to tell them off, but it's wrong sometimes because we punish and judge instead of discipline and guide. There's a big difference between the two. So when you punish and judge someone, you leave them in that state. So they can't get out of that place. But if you discipline and then guide him away, that's when you can actually make change.
Just finally, Sefton, I see in this package it's 7 million for knife crime overall is the pot, and what's been announced today is just over 600,000. But in this pot, there's 2 million to increase support for the young victims of crime, including knife crime, and their families. Can you give us a sense of what it is like for a family or a person who has lost a young member of their family because of knife crime?
It's devastating, and it can be really hard to feel safe again. It's like there's no more trust in the people that are supposed to be helping this situation. it's a place where a lot of people will feel let down, and when people feel let down, they rebel. They rebel up against things, and they feel that there's nothing that anyone can do for me, so I might as well just go down this road. It's really a spiral effect, because knife crime has effect on not just the one that's carrying the knife, not just the one that's being stabbed, but also the families, the friends, the outsiders don't feel safe. It's a massive problem.
That was Sefton Henry talking to me just before we came on air today. He's a former gang member. He now works with the organisation Gangs Line, trying to help young people and communities to tackle gang culture. But, you know, the odds seem to be stacked against them from what Sefton was saying. So this new initiative that the Mayor launched this morning, £600,000 worth, I mean, I'd like to know just from listening to him, and, you know, you can look at the details of this online too if you want to see what this initiative is actually setting out. I'd like to know from you if you think that that will work, particularly if this has affected you in any way in your own life. We had hoped to speak to Sophie Linden, the London Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, but she hasn't turned up. But there we are. We'll keep trying her.
It's interesting because these new initiatives are dealing with the problem of people who already carry knives and the victims of that. But I'm particularly interested to know what makes predominantly young men want to carry knives and be willing to actually use them. Because when I was at school, you would go to Boulogne on the day trip to France, and we would smuggle back flick knives. And it was about boasting that we had a knife. I don't know anyone in my school who would have used a knife. We would fight with our fists. That was the sign of you as a young man. You would never use a weapon. You would think that by using a weapon in some way, you were weak for doing that. But something's changed, hasn't it? Where you are prepared to actually stab someone. Well, and that kind of brutality.
Yeah, well, they're not prepared though, are they? That's the thing, I think.
Well, the evidence clearly shows that they are, because knife crime increased 11% in the capital.
In terms of carrying them, Sefton says the main issue around that is that they want to protect themselves. They are afraid, so therefore they carry the knives to protect themselves. But then, obviously, when push comes to shove, if you've got one and you get involved in an altercation, you know, you're going to come off the worse for wear.
You can't blame the music specifically, surely. I mean, there is a lot of music out there that's
culturally in general, but yeah.
But you mentioned music in it, and the interesting about music, I mean, we've had Stormzy on this show, and some of Stormzy's lyrics talk about absolutely not using weapons. You know, one of his lyrics specifically says about not using weapons. So the thing is about whenever you look at culture, you know, they're so complicated, these issues, and looking at how you take away youth provision and you give a lot of young people no real focus and no real guidance. He talked about mentoring there as well. It's fascinating. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. 85058 is the text number. You know, if you live in those kind of environments, if you yourself are someone who in the past carried a knife, if you knew people at your school that carried knives, perhaps in the environment that you live in right now, where you are now becoming more and more paranoid of young people. Before, you know, back in the days, of course, if a teenager gave you a bit of lip, perhaps you give them a clip around the ear and it's all good. Now, would you think about doing that? Get in contact with us, of course. 85058 is the text number. You can also email Afternoon Edition at bbc.co.uk.
Simon in Elsted says, get this guy Sefton involved. Didn't hear who he was. He is involved already, Simon. What great ideas. I hope he gets somewhere with it. We need to decriminalise drugs, I think, as it takes the money away from the dealers who pay these young guys to deliver it as well. And somebody else takes the completely opposite view, says rehabilitation is for the victims of crime. They are the ones who deserve society's help and money. Punish and judging is for the perpetrators of crime until they learn their lesson. 85058.
Reoffending rates will prove that you've got to do something with people who commit crimes as well. You can't just do that, because they'll keep reoffending and everyone else will be victims of that. It's not black and white.
It's 1:30.
On digital, online, smartphone and tablet, this is BBC 5 Live.
The main headlines. Theresa May says there should be a major investigation into the use of combustible cladding on high-rise tower blocks. Samples from every building tested so far have failed safety checks. 95 buildings in 32 council areas are affected. Google has been ordered to pay more than £2.1 billion by the European Commission. The company was found to have given its own shopping comparison service priority in search results. The Governor of the Bank of England is warning about a surge in consumer debt. Mark Carney says lenders must put aside more than £11 billion over the next 18 months to protect against economic risks. And the man accused of carrying out an attack on worshippers near the Finsbury Park Mosque has appeared in court. 47-year-old Darren Osborne is charged with murder and attempted murder. Well, sport now, here's Telephone.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Heather Knight and Natalie Siver's partnership is keeping England in control of their World Cup match against Pakistan. Henry Moran is watching in Leicester.
And I'm about to see, one would expect, Nat Siver reach her first one-day international 100. She's 99 not out from just 75 deliveries. She waits now, if you'll just bear with me for a moment as this delivery comes in. The batsman is in position waiting. Heather Knight alongside a 93 from 100 deliveries. They've helped England to 227 for 2. The partnership well into the 180s now. Just a little bit of problem for the start of the innings when England lost Taylor and Beaumont early on, but Siver on 99 not out waits now. This delivery comes in, she chops it away hard, runs through for the single. She'll get there as well. She's reached 100, her first in one-day international cricket. It's come from 76 deliveries. She raises her arms to the sky and gets the acclamation of her teammates in the crowd. England 228 for 2. Siver has 100.
Top stuff, Henry. Thank you. Commentary, of course, over on 5 Live Sports Extra. Andy Murray's Wimbledon preparations have suffered a setback after the world #1 pulled out of this afternoon's exhibition at the Hurlingham Club in London. Murray is suffering from a sore hip. Here's more from our correspondent Russell Fuller.
This is an ultra-cautious decision according to Murray's team, and it is expected that he will play his other scheduled match at the Hurlingham Club on Friday afternoon. Murray has been practicing at Wimbledon in recent days, with the young Canadian star Denis Shapovalov amongst others, but the disruption is far from ideal given his first-round exit at Queen's Club last week. It means Murray will have a maximum of 2 matches on grass before he begins the defence of his Wimbledon title on centre court on Monday afternoon.
They're still off for rain at Eastbourne, where Novak Djokovic is in action. Johanna Konta is scheduled to play later. Wimbledon qualifying at Roehampton has also been temporarily suspended because of the weather. Lions head coach Warren Gatland says Ian Henderson and Courtney Lawes have played themselves into test contention after today's 31-all draw against the Hurricanes in Wellington. Lawes came off after 50 minutes, an indication he could feature in the second test on Saturday. Meanwhile, Gatland has brushed off a mocked-up picture of him as a clown on the front of the New Zealand Herald.
As a Kiwi, look, you'd like to think you'd come home and things would be a little bit more positive from 1 or 2 members of the media. That hasn't happened, you know, so you can't let that get to you. You just got to take that on the chin and not be affected by it. You know, there's obviously been 1 or 2 people have had quite a significant campaign against me personally, but you know, that's kind of like water off a duck's back to me.
Everton are close to completing a £7 million deal for KAS UPenn's Nigerian striker Henry Onyekuru. The 20-year-old scored 22 times for the Belgium club last season. Aberdeen have signed Birmingham winner Greg Stewart on a season-long loan deal ahead of England's under-21s European Championship semi-final this evening. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has called on UEFA to investigate his country's group stage exit at the tournament. Italy beat Germany 1-0 in a result that meant both teams progressed at the expense of Slovakia in Poland. Italy and Germany, though, deny any collusion. England, as I mentioned, play Germany this afternoon, a match you can hear live on the BBC Sport website from 5. And Leeds Rhinos have confirmed the signing of Catalan Dragons halfback Richie Myler from next season. He's penned a 3-year contract.
This is BBC 5 Live on digital, online, smartphone and tablet.
Thank you very much indeed for all of your texts on knife crime. Really interesting. Speaking as a former teacher in Peckham, knife crime's a direct result of young people policing themselves, says Mike. Gangs exist in our urban areas to protect themselves, for which there are many reasons. Policing is reactive and needs to return to Bobby's on the beat. The Mayor's new initiative would fund 10 new coppers for London, a drop in the ocean. Duncan says, I lived near Ladbroke Grove for a while. I was shocked how many local kids have been mugged or threatened with knives. I heard 9 or 10-year-olds talking about stabbing each other. Visible policing is a quick fix, but more is needed to deal with deprivation and social mobility. And Joseph in Ilford says, where are the parents in all of this?
Yeah,
85058. Keep them coming to us, and thank you for that. On the road, severe delays on the M62 westbound. That's before junction 22, and it's because of an earlier accident. 2 lanes are closed. Congestion as far back as junction 24 at Ainley Top, and it's taking still an hour and 45 minutes to get through that. Queuing traffic on the M6, Staffordshire, junction 15 for Stoke-on-Trent. Queues are as far back as the M6 Kiel services. And finally on the anti-clockwise at M25, all lanes have been reopened now following an earlier incident, but there's still queuing traffic between junction 25 at Enfield and 24 at Potters Bar.
5 Live Breakfast with Nikki Campbell and Rachel Burden.
On the programme this morning, what about those still trying to piece their lives together after what happened at Grenfell? Leila and Hassan live in a neighbouring block right next to the tower.
Opposite the Green Tower, we see everything what's happening up in there. So that's what really hurt us, you know, because you're seeing people calling for help and you can't do anything. That really hurts. It could be you, me, anybody.
We see it as a graveyard, but we see all these tourists coming and they're trying to take pictures, which I find so disrespectful. How can they come and just take pictures of the tower and doing selfies?
5 Live Breakfast, back tomorrow from 6.
Thanks so much for being with us. It is Afternoon Edition. It's Nahal and Sarah until 4 o'clock today. Loads coming up for you on the programme. But let's talk to Robert O'Neill now. He says he's the man responsible for the death of Osama bin Laden. As part of the Navy SEAL's most elite unit, he took part in the raid on bin Laden's compound in Pakistan in 2011, ending the nearly 10-year search for the Al-Qaeda founder following the September 11th attacks.
Now, Robert became a controversial figure after publicly revealing his role in the mission, and his account of events has been disputed. In a new book called The Operator, he reveals more about what happened that night, as well as his role in the operations that formed the basis for the films Captain Phillips and Lone Survivor. Robert, thank you for joining us.
Hello, Robert.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
A whistle-stop tour of the UK. I know you're going to fly out after this interview. Probably not on a Transformer-like helicopter, I presume.
At least that tells me you read part of the book, so thank you.
No, listen, we read lots of the book. We obviously want to talk about other aspects of the book, but we're going to begin, of course, talking about the thing that everybody is talking about, which is the shooting dead of Osama bin Laden. And one thing that really struck me about it was before the mission, you saying goodbye to your wife and your 2 daughters, and just reading that part of the book was heartbreaking for me. I mean, thinking about that, but for you, try and explain to our listeners what it's like to think, well, I may never see them again.
Well, we'd done that before. That was probably mission number 420 for me.
But this was different because
this one was different.
Your wife sensed something was different.
This is a one-way mission. We had accepted that we weren't going to come home just because of all the variables. We're flying into a sovereign nation on technology we don't know it works. If they see us and shoot us down, it's a helicopter. They can hit it with their anti-aircraft stuff. We could run out of fuel on the way in. The house would probably blow up. If anyone's going to blow himself up, it's going to be bin Laden. So this one was different. So just having the last kisses, especially with my kids, that was really really emotional. But I couldn't tell them anything. I couldn't let them know I was even leaving the country. But you know, just it was something that we all came in to do, and I'm not going to say no to a mission like this. I'm going to go on, and I'm going to be with some of the best people in the world, and this is how it needs to go down.
When you read about people such as yourself, that you're these guys that, you know, USA, and you're crushing Budweiser cans on your forehead for fun, you know, you're like men's
That's
men.
the first time I've heard it put that way.
you're real men's men. But there's quite a lot of elements in this about the emotional fragility that you go through, because you also said something about how brave your wife is, that she could never cry in front of your children, but you could cry all the way.
Yeah, that was something special about a lot of the wives that were involved. They had to stay home with the kids, and we didn't. We just had to be strong from the walk from the living room out to the car, and then you can do whatever you need until you finally get with your group on the airplane that's leaving, and that's when you get back into mode, I guess. But yeah, the wives had they had to stay strong in front of the kids, and I can't say how much that just impresses me. It still does.
When you were told, Robert, about the bin Laden mission during the initial briefings, how vague were the details? What was your first sense of what was actually
Initially, we didn't know exactly what it was, and the Arab Spring had just started up in North Africa, in Tunisia and Libya. So we assumed, because all they told us is, look, we found a thing, and the thing's in a house in a country, and you're going to go get the thing and bring it back to us. So we assumed it was Libya. Like, they found Gaddafi, and they want us to go get him and bring him back. But just as it started to go on over the next few days, we started to realize it was something different. Then we assumed it was bin Laden. And there's some pretty good stories in the operator about how we talk to each other. I can't say a lot of it on television, but it's real sailor language. We figured it out. And then we got to a spot where they said, okay, the reason you're here is this is as close as we've ever been to Osama bin Laden. And just looking around the room at the guys, it was an honor to be asked to be a part of the team, and nobody was afraid, and we didn't cheer. We're professionals. We've been at war a lot, and the question was like, cool, are we going right now? And they wanted us to train up on it for a while. They had some stuff built, and they wanted to read us in on a lot of the intelligence, how they found it, which we didn't really need to know, but they felt the need to tell us. And then we trained up on it for a while. We were one of 5 options, but we kept mission focused. Basically, we were training to prove to them, that the powers that be, that we could do it. And actually, President Obama was really cool when the mission was over. He said, I didn't send you guys because I was 100% sure bin Laden was there, but I was 100% sure that you could go in, find out, and come back, which is pretty cool, I thought.
Talk us through the raid.
Well, we finally got the green light, which means they said we could go on a Friday. We could go either Saturday or Sunday. We decided on a Sunday for various reasons, and then we flew towards Pakistan. We left the base in Jalalabad, Afghanistan. We'd launched from that base a bunch of times before, but generally you hit the river, turn to the left, and go up into the Kunar province. This time we turned to the right and went to Pakistan. We had 90 minutes to fly in, where we know we could get shot down at any time, justifiably. And but that's one of the points too with these senior, like the book's called The Operator. I'm not calling myself the operator, it's about the life of the operator. So these are all 23 operators sitting there with the realization that worrying about getting shot down is not going to help, so I'm just not going to worry about it. And I watched guys fall asleep, put their iPods in on a flight in, and I was just sitting there counting just to keep my mind off at 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 0, 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 0, and we got to a point where we made a right turn about 80 minutes in, and then we made another right turn at about 85 minutes, and then we opened the doors. We saw the city. I knew from just the intelligence there's a golf course nearby, which means this is a serious Navy SEAL mission we're doing. And then, sure enough, as soon as we got there, nothing went the way it was planned. We had a helicopter crash in the front yard. Mine did not, but they had to set us all outside on the north side, which was fortunate for me because then it put me in a spot as opposed to being on the rooftop where I wanted to go. I was actually just given a front row seat to one of the greatest missions ever executed. So we tried to breach. We put an explosive on one of the walls to go on one of the doors to go in. It turned out to be a fake door. There was a brick wall behind it, a stone wall. Then we said we were going to go in the other way. Before we could blow it, our guys opened it up, and then we went in. And there had already been gunfire going on. And so I was sort of in the back of the line going in the main house, so I was able to watch guys do what we'd done hundreds of times before. But it was so, I mean, the words I use, I don't mean to make light of it, but it was so cool to watch them work, knowing the house should blow up at any time, but they're just slow as smooth, smooth as fast. This is what we do: opening doors, clearing places, separating women and children, putting them in spots, and just watching them. And I really didn't have much to do. I'm sort of just making sure we've got a line that's ready to go up the next set of stairs. My guys did breach one of the doors that led to the stairs, and we started to go up to the second level. That was the point too. There was a famous woman they made a movie about who pretty much dedicated her entire life to finding bin Laden, and she was right every step of the way.
This is the CIA agent that 0.30 is about.
And she said, I don't know where the stairs are, but there will be, and when you get there, you'll run into Khalid bin Laden, who will be the last line of defense, and he will be armed. And she was right. He was there. Again, I was about 8 guys back going up, and I didn't have anything to do with it, but I watched the way the point man, the guy in front, deconflicted the situation. I don't want to spoil it because it's a better read in the operator, but the way he did it was so impressive. Khalid was armed. Khalid was a threat, and he eliminated the threat. Then we went up to the second floor, and at that point, everybody except the guy in front split off to my left and to my right because they're clearing unknown spaces, which is what our tactics dictate that we do. They cleared the rooms and hallways right and left, but the point man stayed in front of me, and he's pointing up the stairs. The last set of stairs, at the top there was a curtain, and the curtain was like acting like a door that led to a hallway on the last floor. That's where we knew bin Laden would be. So I was number 2 man behind him, and my job simply is to make sure we have enough guys to go up the next set. So I wanted 6, but I would have settled for 4, but the point man started talking, and he said, hey, we need to go. He's convincing me. Now, it's still dark, it's still quiet, but to hear him talking, I know he's serious. And what he is concerned about is he can see people moving behind that curtain, and he's assuming they're putting on suicide vests as, you know, they're going to be a line of defense, or they're going to try to be martyrs, and he needed to get up there to clear it. So I had my hand on it. There was only 2 of them, and I remember thinking, you know, I'm not being brave. We're going to blow up, but I'm tired of thinking about it. So I squeezed him on the shoulder, and he went up the stairs. He went through the curtain, and there were some people standing there that turned out to be females, but he just assumed they were suicide bombers. So he put himself between them and me, and he sort of tackled them to absorb the blast that inevitably would be coming. So he jumped on a grenade that just didn't go off. I saw that happen in the blink of an eye, and then my tactics dictated that I turn the opposite. You know, you always go the opposite direction. So that led me into a room, and there was Osama bin Laden standing about 3 feet in front of me. He had his hands on his wife's shoulders and was sort of pushing her toward me. I had to do a target identification to include, you know, I was surprised, you know, I can close my eyes and see it at any time. I was surprised how tall he was, how skinny he was. His beard was shorter than it historically had been. It was a little bit gray. I recognized his nose. The fact that he is not surrendering, he is a threat. He's got to be a suicide bomber. So I need to treat him as such, and I shot him twice in the face and then once more in the face when he was on the ground. And it happened so fast, you know, I don't know if he saw me. I definitely saw him. There was no time to say anything, and his wife was still standing there, so I had to move her to the bed out of sort of the way. I remember looking to the left, and there was his 3-year-old kid, his son. And as a father, I was thinking, you know, this poor kid had nothing to do with this. He shouldn't even be here. I set him on the bed next to his mom, and other SEALs at this point were coming into the room and doing what we do, sort of clearing the rest of it, trying to find intelligence. And that's when it started to sink in. You know, a lot of different emotions start to sink in, and one of my guys came up to me, and he looked at me and he said, hey, you good? And I said, yeah, what do we do now? And he kind of smiled and said, well, now we find the computers, man. We've done this hundreds of times. And I said, oh, yeah, you're right, I'm back. And he said, yeah, you just killed bin Laden, man. And it happened that fast. It still, you know, to this day to say, has it sunk in? No. But, you know, I've been able to make peace with it. But then, so after that, we spent the rest of the time we had on the ground finding intelligence that we could, everything electronic, thumb drives, hard drives, any compact discs or whatever, the CDs. And then we decided to leave at about 34 minutes. We split up. We put bin Laden's body in a body bag, put him in one helicopter. My guys got in the other helicopter, and then we flew off. And we had 90 minutes to get out, to fly. If we can make it 90 minutes to Pakistan, or out of Pakistan into Afghanistan, then we pulled it off, and that's what we did. So we sat in the helicopter. We're flying out, and everyone, you know, starts the stopwatches, but nobody's saying anything because it's like, you know, watching a baseball game. Top of the 6th inning, when there's a no-hitter being pitched, you can watch, but you're not going to say anything because you don't want to jinx it. But time kept flying by, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. We knew we had to get to 90, and right around 50 minutes, 60 minutes, we're starting to realize this is almost big. And then about 85 minutes into it, the pilot came over the radio, and he actually said, all right, gentlemen, for the first time in your lives, you're going to be happy to hear this. Welcome to Afghanistan. And that's when it sunk in. It's like, wow, we just pulled this off, and everybody lived.
Robert, a number of people believe bin Laden still to be alive, and one of the reasons that they say this, and the smile comes on your face as I say it, because they've never seen the body. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't care. It's like, how do you prove something that you know happened?
But what do you think about the policy to dump his body at sea?
No, I think it was a good idea, because, and that was agreed upon beforehand. If bin Laden is killed, they need to bury him at sea because we don't need a shrine. That was the reason the house was torn down, and it's been done away with. And I mean, and I'm not, I just don't have time for it because I've seen it, but like, yeah, you haven't seen proof. People haven't seen proof. They want proof. The pictures are there, and I'm sure that eventually, due to politics, someone's going to need to release them to prove that we did it, and it's not a pleasant picture. Will it incite violence? I don't know. It seems like everything incites violence, but a lot of people will complain because they definitely want to know that justice was served, but I don't think they need to see what it looks like. It's not pretty. There's fake pictures of him on the internet that are gruesome, and the real ones are way worse than that.
When did it change from being a take him alive operation to a shoot to kill operation?
I don't think it ever changed. I think it was a kill capture mission, which is what we started doing originally. And just because he was so high value and such a high threat that if he doesn't convince us instantly that he's not a suicide bomber, he needs to be taken down. If he had surrendered, he would have been taken alive. He wasn't surrendering. And people ask me that a lot, like it's a video game. Like, why didn't you? It's like, you know what? Because yeah, we're SEALs, but we also have kids. And this guy has 1 second to not blow up or to convince me he's going to surrender. If not, I want to see my kids too, and I'm going to eliminate the threat. I've dealt with suicide bombers before, and it's a lot different in real life. It's very, very fast and really loud and violent, and it's very permanent. And these are decisions that people are going to Monday morning quarterback it, but I get to see my daughter again. Maybe I'll get to see her get married one day.
In the book, you describe his family members there, and you just talked about his youngest son, and you even describe him having kind of chubby legs. Mm-hmm. You're trained to kill the bad guys. How much training goes into avoiding people who don't need to be killed?
I think that's actually a really good question. I think that the majority of training goes into not killing the wrong people. We would pride ourselves on what we called hostage rescue, and that's very, very intense training to make sure you're not shooting the wrong person. The person that you're dealing with was dealt with the proper amount of force, with the rules of engagement in mind. And we were so good at it that's part of the reason that I think I'm okay mentally, is I've never seen a child hurt. I've never killed anyone that I didn't intend to. And we take pride. I mean, what I would tell people too, because everyone, especially on some of the social media stuff, people want the conspiracy theories and they want the outrage. But I always took pride, and not just in my team, but I'm talking about the coalition. I work a lot with the Special Boat Service out of the UK, and we all took pride in the fact that we are the good guys, and we're doing what we think is right, and we're not going to go out and just try to hurt people for the wrong reasons. And the people that we killed in combat proved to us that they deserve to be killed, just because that's the way we're going to end this fight. And people that surrendered were taken hostage.
You always called your dad, didn't you?
I'm sorry?
You always called your father.
Oh, yeah.
You went on I thought that was another interesting insight into the relationship you had with your father, who's clearly a hero to you.
He was, he and I, we would play basketball. That was our plan in life, to play basketball. I was going to get the scholarship and then play and work with him. So he and I did that every single day. We played basketball, and then I joined the Navy on accident, and I became a SEAL. But I would call him. He came down to SEAL training. He saw me get done with Hell Week. He was at graduation. He was there when I was awarded my first Silver Star. And every time I was in combat, I would call him and say, standard missions, but I would call him and say, hey, I'm just going to go work for a while. And he would say, man, I wish I was coming with you. And I would always say, yeah, Dad, I wish you were coming too. And we'd kind of joke, and then I'd be back calm. But on this one, he didn't even know where I was. And I said, I got to go to work. And he said, okay, I wish I was coming with you. And I said, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm with some great guys. And he just knew something was up. And he was always the kind of father that no matter what happened around the world, he was convinced that I did it. And it was almost funny to me. It's like, Dad, we've got a coalition of some of the finest people in the world, nowhere near this one. But on that one, and he found out about it, he just knew. And I was like, okay, fine. For the first time, you're right. And I was involved with this one. So he's a good dude.
Very quickly after this, Robert, you talk about how when you were asked who had shot him, and you said it was me. And very quickly after that, things began to spiral, and you began to hear that other SEALs.
Well, that wasn't exactly the way it went down, because I never said it was me. What I said is we all did it.
Right.
And then the problem is, on this 19-hour flight from Bagram back to Norfolk, everybody asked the one question, hey, who did it? And it had spread before I even got back to Virginia Beach. I had friends that worked in the White House that heard my name before I even landed.
So it became this huge thing. Everybody.
Well, it did, and it's. I mean, it's not something that I wanted. It's not. I mean, we were so used to doing what we thought were the right things for so long. I mean, so many missions, and then all of a sudden to be in the limelight, it wasn't. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't fun for me. A lot of my guys didn't enjoy. We'd seen it before. My friend who was the lead sniper rescuing Captain Richard Phillips, that he got the same thing where you're bragging about it. You should keep it pushing. This is a tough secret to keep, and it's definitely you're not getting the toothpaste back in the tube, and these have been difficult choices, but I've never once said look at me. I did it. I mean, I'd first give credit to the analysts, especially the female that found him, then give credit to the pilots that flew us in there, especially the flight lead that made the decision to save everyone's lives by putting it down instead of powering up and not killing everyone, then the team that got us there, and then the point man who gave his life so the guy behind him, not even knowing it was me, could get the shot. So it was, I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, I got there on the shoulders of giants, and I did what any operator would have done. I turned the opposite way of the guy in front of me, and I went through my rules of engagement and took the shot. Any Marine, any Ranger, any SEAL, any Green Beret would have done the exact same thing I did. I happened to be there because of tactics that were invented by somebody else.
Why did you decide to write a book about it and the other operations that you've been on?
I came out with the story initially because of an experience I had at the 9/11 Memorial in New York City with surviving members who lost husbands or wives or daughters in the World Trade Center. That was the first time I ever told the story in person, and to see the responses it was not a dry eye there. It was overwhelming, and it's happened a lot. I've talked with first responders who were there that are dying because of what they breathed in, how many people they saw hit the pavement when they jumped. Just for them to say that I'm going to sleep better tonight, that's enough for me to tell the story. And I assume a little bit of risk. It doesn't matter. I've done it before. The book itself, the Bin Laden story, had been out for a while. The book was written, again, the Bin Laden raid is chapter 23 of the book. It's a mission. Right at the end. It's a mission that we did. But the fact that I'm a white guy from Butte, Montana, who couldn't swim, and became a Navy SEAL, and ended up somehow in Bin Laden's bedroom after doing a lot of these missions. It's just proof. It's a good story, but proof that it doesn't matter where you're from or what you look like. You can do anything you want as long as you work hard. The big thing is avoid the negativity, stay positive, and never quit. And that's the whole story is about that. It's not a war story. It's a story about sometimes it's better to be lucky than it is to be good, and it's easy to be hard. It's hard to be smart, stuff like that. It's like just don't quit. Stop listening. Like I had an instructor tell me once before we started the most difficult part of training. He said, "You're about to go to war for the first time, and the enemy is all your doubts, all your fears, and everybody you know back home that told you weren't good enough to do this. Keep your head down, keep moving forward, no matter what, never quit, and you'll be fine." And that's the premise of the whole book. I just happened to end up in Bin Laden's bedroom.
So if there were any regrets, what would they be? I
have one regret that stands out. I think about him every day. We had the best day of that SEAL team in May of 2011, and we had the worst in August when we got shot down. And I had a friend once ask me for if I want to have a drink. His name was Robert Reeves, and I said no. And he had that drink, and he said, one of these days, a lot of us are going to die on one of those helicopters, and he was that guy, and I regret not having that drink with him.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Robert O'Neill there, whose book is called The Operator, the SEAL Team Operative and the Mission That Changed the World. Safe flight wherever you're heading to next, Robert.
We didn't even get into the Captain Phillips story or the Lone Survivor story, but maybe another time. It's just coming up to 2 o'clock. It's 5 Live. It's afternoon edition. And after 2...
Could standing be about to return to English football clubs? League One club Shrewsbury Town has applied to turn 500 seats into a safe standing area. So what do you think about that? Would you welcome the return of standing to English football clubs?
And the performer Rhiannon Stars on the emotional, physical and psychological effects she experienced identifying as transgender.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live.
It's 2 o'clock on 5 Live. This is Afternoon Edition with Sarah, Brett and Nihala Afanaika. Our main story has been a rise in the number of high-rise buildings found to contain dangerous cladding.
And in sport, Knight and Siva score centuries as England's women build a commanding score against Pakistan.
This is BBC 5 Live.
And here is the news at 2 o'clock. The Prime Minister is calling for an urgent national investigation into the use of cladding on buildings. So far, 95 high-rises have failed safety tests following the Grenfell Tower fire. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
I think it's still unclear exactly what the regulations were, what tests were conducted, and how the material fits into the wider design of the building. A material can fail a safety check, but that doesn't mean that the whole building itself is unsafe.
Google says it's thinking of appealing against a record fine handed down by the European Commission. It's been told to pay more than £2 billion for distorting the market. Margrethe Vestager is the EU's competition commissioner.
It has promoted its own service and demoted rival services. It has harmed competition and consumers. That's illegal under EU antitrust rules. And that is why we have taken today's decision.
Nicola Sturgeon is to make an announcement in the next hour after the way forward about the way forward for Scotland. The First Minister is expected to talk about her latest views on a second independence referendum. It follows the general election in which the SNP lost 21 seats. A British Sikh couple claim they're unable to adopt a white child because of their ethnic background. Sandeep and Reena Mandas say they were rejected by their local adoption agency, Adopt Berkshire. Alice Noon is from the adoption charity Quorum in London.
The law is really clear about prioritising all of children's needs and not exclusively thinking about ethnicity and ethnic match. You know, there are a lot of children who need permanent families through adoption, and they should have the opportunity of a family, whatever their race and background.
Adopt Berkshire says it doesn't comment on ongoing court cases. A gang who tortured and killed a vulnerable man on Tyneside have been jailed. Jimmy Prout was found dead near his home in North Shields after sustained abuse. 4 people have received sentences.